So here are the top 5 deadliest openings for this year. Coming in number 5 is the so-called Hacksaw Gambit. It comes out of the king's pawn move, and as black responds symmetrically, you go into the main line first, but now you play pawn to d4, attacking their center. As they recapture, you don't take back, but you play bishop c4 instead. Now in this position, many of your opponents would be tempted to play bishop c5. It's a normal development move, plus this solidifies this pawn on d4, making it actually pretty difficult for you to get it back, as black now defends it really well. And now you pretend like you gave up on an idea to get this pawn back, and you just play pawn c3, offering to trade pawns. In most cases, your opponents are going to capture this pawn, but now you drop the f-bomb. Bishop takes f7. And after black recaptures, queen to d5 is a double attack to the king and the bishop, which allows you to regain your sacrificed material. And in this line, the win rate for white is over 65%. That's why it's such an effective opening. Now, after the king goes back, here's a pro tip. You could take the bishop right away, but it's even stronger to include this in between check, queen to h5. It provokes black to play g6, which weakens this diagonal and is going to be helpful for us down the road. So now you get the bishop back on c5, and notice that if black takes here on b2, that's going to be pretty bad for them actually, because from here your bishop is just going to be monstrous, and it puts so strong pressure on black. So if they ever want to trade on b2, they're welcome. Now, if they don't trade, they're going to do something else. Let's say d6, doesn't really matter. Then you are going to get this pawn back by the queen. You also hit this rook on h8. Notice how useful it is for us that the pawn stands on g6, not on g7. That's why we wanted to provoke this advancement earlier. Now, after queen to c3, we attack the rook. Let's say black covers it somehow, and then you can just castle. And in this position, it's pretty easy for you to develop your attack. Let's not forget that this king has moved back and forth, therefore it can't castle anymore. It's going to stick there in the center of the board, and you're just going to play bishop g5 probably, put pressure here, maybe bishop h6, and then break through in the center with e5 and knock out the king along the e-file. So generally your plan is very simple. I'll show you an example variation. You don't have to remember it. It's just to illustrate how the game possibly could continue. So let's say you go bishop g5. Now this knight is overpinned in every possible direction. Black needs to defend it somehow. You could play knight d2 just to finalize your development, and then at some point e5 and you're going for the kill. Let's say queen e7, you can even play e5 right away. You could go rook e1 and then e5, or just e5 straight away. Let's say black captures, you can sack the knight over here, and on the next move you play rook e1. And because of this massive pin along the e-file, you're going to get the knight back on the next move after rook takes e5. So this will also hit both the king and the queen. Again, the king cannot castle, so it's going to stick there in the center of the board, and you're going to win the game easily. How about your opponent trying the Sicilian defense against you? Coming in number 4 is the surprising Mangarini variation pawn to a3. Looks absurd at first, looks like it violates all the classical opening rules, and yet it brings phenomenal results. Now, the first idea is to prepare for you to push pawn to b4. Now, your opponents in most cases are going to go knight c6. First of all, because it's their standard Sicilian defense move anyway, and secondly, they hope to stop you from pushing the pawn forward, and yet you do just that. You play b4 anyway. Now, it attacks the pawn, you're ready to go forward and chase away this knight, therefore it looks the easiest for black to just accept this trade, and then they can win the pawn. For now, they still can't figure out what was the point. Why did you give up a pawn for no reason? But now you play c3, gaining 1 tempo, and after that you follow up with pawn to d4. And now you can see that white actually has some compensation for the sacrificed pawn. You've got a strong center, this pawn is ready to be pushed forward and to attack this knight, you've got an open file for your rook, life's pretty good. Now, your opponent will most likely be annoyed by the fact that you can push the pawn forward and keep chasing away this knight. So they go pawn d5, looks like it makes a lot of sense. Controls the center, opens up this bishop, and just follows all the normal rules. You trade on d5, queen takes, and now you play another weird move, knight to a3. So far it still looks like you just have no idea what you're doing, you violate all the rules, you put the knight on the rim of the board, you don't fight for the center, like all that stuff, you gave up a pawn. But strangely enough, you've got a very strong threat of knight going to b5, and from here, jumping forward to c7 with a royal fork to the king, queen, and even rook in the corner of the board. Although the threat is very simple, it's very hard for black to stop it. This gives you 68% win rate, and it's a lot of fun. In most cases, your opponents are going to go pawn e5, which looks active, but it misses the mark, because it does nothing to stop you from going knight to b5. Of course, we're not going to trade, we're going to push our own plan, knight b5. Notice that our knight is defended, therefore he can't just capture it by the queen. And now knight to c7 is real, and from there we're gonna fork all the valuable pieces your opponent has. Now after the queen drops back to d8 trying to cover this square, it now gives path to your central pawn so you can go forward and gain one more tempo. After this knight goes anywhere, doesn't really matter, you keep pushing the pawn forward and now you lock your pawn completely and you insist on playing knight to c7. There is still no normal way for black to cover this square, and the only attempt is going knight a6 trying to defend it. But you don't shy away from sacrificing your rook because you gain significant advantages after that. Now after knight to c7 fork, you're going to get your rook back with interest. So after king to d7, you could already win the rook and that would give you an extra piece and a winning attack. But it's even stronger and much cooler to play queen a4 going for the checkmating attack. The following variation is just beautiful. The only square for the king to go to is to bravely move forward king to d6. And now your knight sneaks into your opponent's king's residency. Knight e8, check to the king. There is no way back for the king. You can always play either bishop a3 and control this diagonal or bishop c4 and control this diagonal, and there is just no safe square for your opponent's king. Let's say he goes king e6, I can play bishop c4, and again you're ready to bring your other bishop here so the king can't hide there. Plus our knight takes away this square. Our queen takes away this diagonal. You see that? It's such a strong attack out of nothing. So king goes to f5, let's say. Now queen c2, we just chase this king. If let's say e4, you can now play g4. We just check, check, check all the way to the checkmate. And if king goes to e5, now you play f4. And after this trade on f3, here's a really beautiful finish. It's hard to believe that this position occurred in real practical games, but it's true. It's not a made-up position, and it is a checkmate. Alright, so far we talked about black playing the most natural moves, pawn e5, pawn c5. How about your opponent goes to some less popular options, for example the perk defense? Now we've got an interesting opening weapon against it. Here in the main line of the perk defense you play bishop g5 first, threatening to double his pawns. Black goes bishop to g7, and now we push the pawn forward to e5 and attack this knight. What I like about all of these openings is that we actually count on your opponent playing the most natural, most expected moves, which lead him straight to failure. Now after this exchange on e5, your opponent realizes that you're gonna trade on d8 and expose their king, so they want to trade themselves. Okay, you recapture, still this knight has to go. After the knight goes, knight g4 looks like pretty cool for black. They're actually attacking this pawn twice, not that easy for you to defend it, but you say, okay, you want a pawn, go get it. You play pawn h3. Your opponent is happily grabbing the pawn, but now after knight to d5, it's the payoff time. So knight is threatening to capture over here, and from there we're gonna check the king and grab this rook in the corner. There is no way for black to defend it. Our rook on d1 is also doing a good job putting pressure here. We are actually attacking this pawn on e7 as well, but we don't really need it all that much because knight to c7 is just a really juicy fork to the king and the rook. If black tries to defend it by knight a6, that doesn't really work because you can simply trade it off by your bishop from here. So you trade off, and after that you still take knight takes c7, check to the king, it has to go king to f8, and now you could take the rook, but you don't even need it because rook to d8 is just a straightforward checkmate. Coming in number 2 is the bishop's opening with a 70% win rate in the main line. Now, if you've been following this channel for some time, then you know that the bishop's opening is one of my favorite openings for white, and now you'll see why. It's one of the reasons why. In this position, your opponent will usually play knight f6, knight c6, and bishop c5 in whatever order, but it doesn't matter for us, we're gonna aim for the same opening system. So your opponent goes knight f6, for example, attacking this knight, we defend it, knight c6, knight c3, bishop c5. Notice that we delayed development of our kingside knight because we want to give path to our pawn to go forward, and you play pawn to f4, aiming for something similar to the king's gambit, but here the advantage is that's not even a gambit because this pawn is defended. Therefore, if your opponent wants to trade, good for you. This will only help you to develop your bishop with a tempo, and you'll have advantage in the center. In most cases, however, your opponents are going to play d6 and trying to just keep the position in the center. After that, you play f5. You shut down their light square bishop and you gain space on the king side. What I like about this variation is that it's really difficult for black to figure out the right path. And their usual moves, their trivial moves, just don't work. So after your opponent, let's say, castles, thinking that he's doing all the right stuff, all the book moves, right? Develop minor pieces, castle, play pawns in the center. Black seems to do all the correct moves, but after bishop g5, basically they're done. There is no way out of this pin. we're gonna go knight d5, trade on f6, expose the king, and go for the attack. Now, this pawn on f5 is doing a great job. It just locks the position for black. They can't get out, they can't develop this light square bishop, and can't do much. If they try to play pawn h6, you can get fancy and even sack the bishop with pawn to h4, and black has not much to do anyway. Knight d5 is still coming, there is no way for them to break the pin. If they accept this bishop sack, then now we've got our rook involved. Plus we attack the knight. And if the knight goes anywhere, then we're gonna bring the queen over here. We're stacking heavy pieces along the h-file, and we are going to checkmate black either on h7 or h8. So right now we're going to capture the knight. If the knight goes, then queen h8 is checkmate. Here comes the winner. It's our shameless Trojan horse variation. You first play knight f3, knight c6, d4, pretending like you're playing the Scotch game, but after black captures the pawn, instead of playing the knight over here, all of a sudden you jump with the knight forward to g5. Now, it looks like the move doesn't make much sense, but your opponent realizes that you're probably going to go bishop c4 and team up against this pawn on f7. Therefore, in most cases, your opponents are going to go pawn to h6, trying to kick this knight away. But now, you're going to sacrifice the knight on f7. That's why we call it the Trojan horse variation, even though, as far as I know, it does not have any official name anyway. So king takes, you follow up with bishop to c4, check to the king. And now, the natural reaction of your opponent is to bring the king back, seemingly to safety. So in most cases, they go king to e8, but now I follow up with queen h5, and it's nearly a scholar's checkmate, really. Queen delivers check to the king has to go, now queen comes to f7, and although it's not the checkmate right away, it's gonna be the checkmate within a couple moves. So bishop f4 delivers the check, and then we just follow up all the way until the king is checkmated. Of course, your opponent could have played better and avoided an immediate checkmate, but even if, let's say, your opponent goes king to e7, there is no way for you to checkmate black right away. Stockfish tells you that black is completely winning because of their extra piece. In reality though, if you're not Stockfish and you're playing this as black, you've got this exposed king, which hampers your development, and it's definitely not easy at all to play this as black. In reality, the win rate for white and black here is about the same, so white still has some compensation. With that being said, I understand that you may have some questions. What if black played this move or the other move? I actually recorded in the past a dedicated video about this particular variation where I go more in depth and answer all these what if questions. So I'll drop a link below in the description of the video. And by the way, I'll provide links to every opening that I mentioned today. So if you got interested in one of these opening systems, you can head over to the description, find the video about it, and study it in detail so that you'll be ready to use it in your games.